and somebody's barbecue grill 2 streets over. The sky had that deep bruised purple you only get in the South, just before dark settles in completely. Darius had been on a construction site in Midtown since 6 that morning, managing a crew of 14 men pouring foundations for a mixed-use development on 10th Street. His boots were dusty. His shoulders ached in that good, solid way, the kind that tells you that you earned your tiredness. He hadn't called ahead. He wanted to surprise her. My wife had been stressed lately, or so she said. Client meetings running long, vendor calls going sideways, the usual friction of managing the marketing side of redevelopment. So Darius had stopped at their favorite spot, a little soul food place tucked off Piedmont Road that had been feeding Atlanta families since 1987, and ordered her smothered pork chops with dirty rice and a slice of sweet potato pie. The kind of dinner that says I see you without saying a single word. Looking back, he might have noticed things earlier. The way she had stopped humming in the kitchen the past few months. The way a Friday evening that used to be theirs had quietly, without announcement, become a late meeting. Small absences, the kind a man who trusts his wife tells himself mean nothing. He pulled into the driveway on Valley Road. The living room light was on. The front door was sitting slightly open. He thought nothing of it. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, the paper bag warm against his arm. And then he stopped. Khalil Brooks was sitting on Darius's sofa, wearing Darius's gray hoodie, holding a glass of wine. He was 35, well-dressed underneath the borrowed hoodie, carrying the kind of smooth, untested confidence that certain men wear like cologne. He looked comfortable, settled, like a man sitting in his own living room. Aaliyah was beside him, her hair slightly undone, laughing at something Khalil had said. Not the polished, social laugh she used at client dinners. The other kind. The kind that lives in the body. The kind you only give to people you are no longer trying to impress. She startled when she saw Darius, jumped to her feet. "Baby, you're home early." Darius's eyes moved slowly across the room. Not from panic, from habit. The same habit he used on every construction site. Reading what is level, what is off, what is quietly failing beneath the surface. And then he saw it. On the collar of his gray hoodie, the one currently on Khalil Brooks's back, was a deep red lipstick stain. He recognized that shade immediately. My wife only wore that particular red when she was meeting important clients. She called it her closing day color. On the coffee table sat 2 glasses of wine. One of them was engraved, his name and Aaliyah's, their 5th anniversary date. A gift from his mother. That glass was not for guests. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. The deeper we invest in something, the harder it becomes to face the truth about it, even when the evidence is standing right in front of us. People in long-term relationships often see the signs of betrayal months before they are willing to name them. The mind delays the reckoning just long enough for the heart to brace for what is coming. Darius stood in the doorway for a long moment. "Got home early today," he said. Low, quiet, not a question. Aaliyah launched into an explanation. Khalil was a strategic consultant. They had been reviewing a contract proposal. It had run late. She had grabbed the first glass she could find. Khalil did not move, did not stand, did not offer so much as an embarrassed smile. He sat on Darius's couch, in Darius's hoodie, with my wife's lipstick on his collar, and he smiled. Darius set the bag of food down on the table, gently. The way you set something down when you are afraid of what your hands might do if they are empty. His eyes moved once more to the anniversary glass. Then he turned, walked through the front door, and sat down on the porch steps without another word. He didn't ask. Because if he asked, he might get an answer he was not ready to hear. And Darius Reed was a man who did not move until he was ready. A few minutes later, he was sitting in his truck on the street, both hands on the steering wheel, engine off. The soul food was still inside. The sweet potato pie was still warm. He didn't eat it that night. He sat in that truck for a long time, watching the light in his living room window, listening to Atlanta settle into evening all around him. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of that man's chest, something that had been trusting and open and soft began, slowly, deliberately, to close. But what Darius didn't know yet was that the lipstick stain on a borrowed hoodie was the smallest thing wrong in that house. Stay with us. If you were Darius, sitting alone in that truck that night, would you have walked back in or driven away for good? Drop stay or leave in the comments right now. I need to know which side you're on. Some men blow up the moment they feel disrespected. They yell, they accuse, they say things in the driveway at midnight that the whole neighborhood remembers for years. Darius Reed was not that kind of man. He was the kind who goes quiet, not because he is weak, but because he is thinking. And a thinking man is almost always more dangerous than a yelling one. So he went back inside that night, ate alone, and said nothing. Over the next several weeks, he watched. Aaliyah began spending more time away from home under the cover of work. Reed Development was managing its largest contract to date, a mixed-use residential project in Atlanta's Virginia Highland neighborhood, valued at just under $4 million. It was the kind of contract that changes a company's trajectory, the kind that demands full attention from everyone involved. It was also, Darius would come to understand, the kind of contract that makes certain people start doing very different math. He noticed the small things first. Aaliyah's phone going face down whenever he walked into a room. The tablet she once left open on the kitchen counter now locked and carried to the bedroom each night. The way she returned home with explanations already prepared for questions he had not yet asked. He waited, and he said nothing, but he was cataloging everything. He made 3 calls to subcontractors that evening. He made a 4th call the following morning, to a legal consultant named Zuri Hale, a woman his former business attorney had recommended. She specialized in corporate asset protection. He asked her to quietly begin reviewing Reed Development's operating contracts and signatory documents. He did not tell her why. She did not ask. Then one afternoon, while Aaliyah was at a client lunch in Midtown, she left her tablet on the coffee table, unlocked. She had been in a hurry. Darius was not snooping. The screen was already open when he sat down, and the name at the top of the message thread was Khalil Brooks. He read. The messages stretched back 11 months. Not 3 weeks. Not a month. 11 months. Beginning almost exactly when Reed Development had signed the Virginia Highland contract. The early messages were calibrated flattery, the kind that feels spontaneous but reads, in hindsight, like a rehearsed script. Then they grew more specific, more operational. One message from Khalil, dated 4 months prior, read, "Did you do what I told you? Don't let him see the original agreement." Darius read that sentence twice. Then he powered the tablet off, set it back exactly where he had found it, walked to his truck, and drove to Piedmont Park. He sat on a bench near the lake until the light changed. He began to wonder whether it wasn't just love being taken from him. Maybe something much larger was being stolen. Psychology note: love bombing and strategic seduction. Researchers call it love bombing, orchestrated flattery and manufactured intimacy, used not out of genuine feeling, but as a method of access and control. Khalil entered Aaliyah's life at exactly the right moment, when she felt newly empowered by the Virginia Highland contract. He wasn't falling for her. He was mapping her, learning what she needed to hear, and feeding it back to her until she trusted him completely and signed everything he needed her to sign. 3 weeks later, Reed Development held a contract celebration at the St. Regis Atlanta on Peachtree Street. Darius wore a charcoal suit. Khalil arrived 40 minutes late and moved through the room with the ease of a man who believed the night already belonged to him. Darius watched from across the room, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Aaliyah moved toward him, champagne flute raised, her smile bright and social. "Baby, you need to relax tonight. Have a real drink. Celebrate with everybody." "I'm good," Darius said. She pressed, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby table to hear. "He always worries too much about his health. Tonight he needs to have fun. Go have a drink with Khalil, loosen up a little." A few guests laughed politely. Darius smiled. It did not reach his eyes. He excused himself and stepped out onto the balcony. Marcus found him there a few minutes later. Darius's longtime foreman was a big-shouldered man from Decatur who had worked alongside him since the days when Reed Development was nothing more than a truck, a toolbox, and a handshake. He did not seek Darius out at parties unless something was wrong. He leaned close and kept his voice low. "Mr. Reed, I wasn't sure when to bring this up, but Khalil came by the site last week asking for the technical drawings for Buckhead Phase 2. Told me Mrs. Aaliyah sent him." He paused. "She's never once mentioned anything like that to me." "You give them to him?" "No, sir. Something didn't sit right." Darius placed a hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder. "Good man." That night, after driving home from the party, Darius turned around and went back to the Peachtree Street office. He let himself in with his key, still his key for now, and spent 40 minutes mounting a small security camera near the filing room. He placed it in plain sight on the wall bracket. He told himself it was general security, but he knew what it was. It was the kind of thing a man does when he has stopped trusting what he already suspects. Marcus had noticed once that Darius kept a photograph in the chest pocket of his work jacket, an old one, slightly worn at the corners. He never asked about it. Some things a man carries for reasons that are entirely his own. 2 nights after the party, Aaliyah sat across from Darius at the kitchen table and slid a manila folder toward him. She was dressed as though she had somewhere to be afterward. Her voice was composed, rehearsed. "I want a divorce," she said. "I had an attorney draw this up." The settlement proposed a 60-40 split. The attorney's letterhead matched a firm name Khalil had casually mentioned at a dinner party 6 months prior. Darius read every page. Psychologists call this economic coercion by proxy, using a trusted partner to unknowingly transfer assets on behalf of a third party. The victim becomes the instrument of their own undoing, while the predator's hands stay entirely clean. Aaliyah didn't understand the clause. She signed what she was guided to sign, by a man she fully believed was on her side. Buried in the legal language near the back was a clause stating that the company's intellectual property and subcontractor list would belong to whichever party was named in the current primary operating contract. To a casual reader, it looked like standard language. To Darius, it was a blueprint for a theft. He set the folder down. "You really prepared for this," he said softly. Aaliyah flinched, just barely, but he saw it. He closed the folder. A long pause, the kind that fills a room. "I'll sign," he said. She blinked. She had not expected that. What she did not know, could not have known, was that while she was assembling that settlement folder, Darius had already been making quiet calls. Marcus had already talked to the crew. 3 of the most critical subcontractors had already told Darius, in their own plain words, that they did not work for a name on a contract. They worked for the man they trusted. He had already begun building the next thing. She just did not know it yet. He agreed to walk away. What Aaliyah did not understand was that when Darius Reed walks away from something, he takes with him everything that was ever truly his, and not a single page of paperwork can stop that. Here is the thing about a man who builds for a living. He understands foundations. He knows that what looks solid on the surface can be sitting on nothing underneath. He knows that the most dangerous damage is always the kind you cannot see, the kind that hides until the structure above it finally gives way. Darius Reed understood foundations better than anyone. So when he said he would walk away, he meant every word. He just did not mean it the way Aaliyah thought he did. Within 2 weeks of signing the separation paperwork, Darius had quietly incorporated a new company. Legacy Reed Construction. Not out of bravado, out of intention. Legacy meant something to him. It meant you built things that outlasted the drama, the betrayal, the years spent trusting the wrong people. It meant the work was always larger than the wound. He took nothing from Reed Development that was legally bound to it. Not the signed contracts, not the company vehicles, not the desk chairs in the Peachtree Street office. He took only what no document had ever been able to contain: his knowledge of every site, every subcontractor's particular strength, every vendor relationship built over 15 years of showing up on time and paying people exactly what he owed them. Marcus came with him. 3 other key crew leaders followed, and one by one, quietly, so did the subcontractors. Not because Darius asked, because when those subcontractors received calls asking whether they would continue working on Reed Development projects without Darius overseeing operations, to a man, every single one said no. No explanations, no negotiation, just no. No press release, no confrontation. The loyalty simply moved, like water finding its own level. What Darius carried out, and what Khalil never grasped, is what sociologists call social capital. Trust and credibility built through years of consistent, ethical behavior. It cannot be transferred by contract or purchased with a company name. You cannot own the fact that Marcus drove 2 hours through a rainstorm simply because Darius Reed asked him to. Social capital is a direct reflection of character, and that is one currency Khalil had no way to counterfeit. Meanwhile, Aaliyah and Khalil moved quickly. They had the name, the office, the Peachtree Street address. They signed a major new contract with a Buckhead real estate developer for a high-end condominium project. On paper, it looked like momentum. Khalil worked fast behind the scenes. He began altering internal project files, methodically, carefully, inserting fabricated performance notes, questioning Darius's past decision-making, and positioning himself as the real operational force behind Reed Development's success. He was thorough. He was confident. He forgot about the camera. The one Darius had mounted on the wall near the filing room the night after Marcus pulled him aside on the St. Regis balcony, placed in plain sight, recording everything. The meeting was scheduled as a project review with 4 development partners who had invested significantly in the new Buckhead contract. They arrived at the Midtown Atlanta office at 10 in the morning. Aaliyah sat at the head of the conference table. Khalil sat beside her, both sharp, both ready. The conference room door opened. Darius Reed walked in. Clean white dress shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, a laptop under his arm. He nodded to the development partners. He knew 3 of them personally, had worked alongside 2 of them for years. He set the laptop on the table without a word to either Aliyah or Khalil. Aliyah rose from her chair so fast it scraped the floor. "What are you doing here? You have no right." "I'm not here for you," Darius said. His voice was almost gentle. "I'm here for them." He nodded toward the partners, then opened the laptop and turned the screen toward the room. "Before anyone in this room signs anything further with this company," he said, "I think you should see this first." He pressed play. The footage was clean. Clear picture, clear audio. It showed Khalil in the filing room late at night, pulling documents, photographing contract pages with his phone. On a separate date, Khalil seated at Aliyah's own desk, entering figures into the accounting software while she stood in the doorway watching, not questioning, not stopping him. The room went very still. Khalil moved first. He was halfway around the table, one hand reaching for the laptop, when one of the development partners, a veteran Atlanta builder named Gerald, pressed his palm flat on the table. "Don't," Gerald said. Khalil stopped. Aliyah stood with both hands braced against the table's edge. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. What crossed her face in that moment was not anger. It was something slower, heavier. The expression of a person watching something collapse and being unable to move a single step to stop it. For months, Aliyah's mind had protected her from a collision between 2 beliefs she could not hold simultaneously. Khalil loves me, and Khalil is using me. The mind will work extraordinarily hard to defend a belief it has built an identity around, rationalizing small warnings, dismissing inconsistencies. But there is always a threshold. For Aliyah, that threshold arrived on a laptop screen in a midtown conference room. Once you cross it, there is no going back to who you were before you knew. The footage ended. Then, from near the back of the conference room, a woman stepped quietly forward. Calm, well-dressed, carrying a small USB drive, she walked it directly to Darius and placed it in his hand, without addressing anyone else in the room. Zuri Hale. The same legal consultant Darius had called the morning after he read the messages on Aliyah's tablet. She had been quietly working this case for weeks, and she had found something Darius himself had not known to look for. Darius plugged the drive in and opened a second audio file. Khalil's voice filled the room. "The fish took the bait. Once she signs 2 more documents, we move the money into a Delaware account. She thinks she's getting a business partner. She's getting a bill." On the other end of that call, someone laughed. The recording ended. The silence that followed was the complete kind. No shifting in chairs, no throat clearing. Just the sound of 4 investors recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the room they were sitting in. One of the female partners reached for her phone. Gerald was writing in his notepad before the echo had fully faded. Khalil looked toward the door. "I'm not finished with you," Darius said. The words were quiet. Not a threat, a simple statement of fact. The meeting ended quickly. The development partners gathered their things and spoke quietly among themselves in the hallway. 2 of them stepped aside with Darius. Not one of them addressed Khalil on the way out. A few minutes later, Darius and Zuri were sitting in his truck in the parking deck on West Peachtree Street. The midday traffic hummed outside. Zuri turned the USB drive once between her fingers. "Do you want to hear the rest?" She asked. Darius looked straight ahead at the concrete wall of the parking deck. A long pause. "Not yet," he said. He started the engine. She said nothing further, She understood, and she did not push. That was one of the first things Darius had noticed about Zuri Hale. She offered information. She offered presence. Then she waited, patiently, for you to decide what to do with both. He appreciated that more than he could have put into words. The recording was only half the story. Because while Khalil was being exposed in that conference room, he was already, across town, doing something far worse. There is a kind of cruelty that is worse than anger. Anger is hot. It flares, it burns, and then it burns itself out. But what Khalil Brooks practiced was never anger. It was calculation, cold, patient, premeditated. The kind that smiles at you over a dinner table while silently cataloging everything in the room that might be worth taking someday. And when the walls began closing in, he did not panic. He executed. In the truck, Darius drove without a destination for a while. He was not triumphant. He was not relieved. He was simply a man carrying the full weight of what he now knew, which is not a light thing, even when you have been preparing for it for weeks. By the time he reached Decatur, he had made the decision to finish what he started. And across town, while Darius was still driving, Khalil was already at the bank. By that same afternoon, while the development partners were still processing what they had witnessed in that conference room, Khalil had withdrawn $420,000 from the Reed Development operating account. Not a wire transfer with a processing delay, not a check that could be stopped. An immediate electronic transfer to a private account. He was out of Atlanta before sunset. Behavioral researchers call this the planned exit sequence, a pre-scripted set of actions the predator maps out before the relationship even begins. The conference room exposure was not a surprise to Khalil. It was simply the signal that his timeline had accelerated. The funds were already organized. The destination was already arranged. He was never emotionally invested in Aliyah. He was operationally invested in her. The moment her usefulness expired, so did his presence. That evening, Darius sat at the kitchen table in his Decatur apartment, reviewing the bank records Zuri had helped him access through their attorney. A cup of coffee had gone cold at his elbow. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. He found something that made him set everything down carefully. There was not one power of attorney. There were three. Each one had arrived with a plausible explanation. The first, a tax deadline, Khalil said, that required someone to act quickly if Aliyah was traveling. The second, a refinancing opportunity on the company's credit line. Time-sensitive, routine, nothing unusual. The third had been signed over breakfast one distracted morning. Aliyah had been feeling unwell that week, her mind elsewhere, and she had not read past the header. Khalil had timed it well. He always timed things well. On the third document, the most recent with the widest scope, there was a date discrepancy. Aliyah had signed it on February 3rd, but in her own handwriting, she had written March 3rd. Under normal circumstances, that error would have created grounds to challenge the document's validity. A responsible attorney would have corrected it before filing. Khalil had never corrected it. He had kept the error in place deliberately, as a tool for creating legal ambiguity if the document were ever questioned, buying himself time while the money moved. Darius looked at that date for a long time. Then he said quietly, to no one in the room, "She didn't know. Not she is innocent. Not it doesn't matter. Simply, she did not know what she had been guided into signing. She had extended total trust to a man who had engineered that trust from the beginning, and he had used it the way a calculated hand uses a borrowed tool." Zuri was sitting across the table. She waited, as she always did. Finally, Darius said, "But now, it doesn't matter anymore." He closed the laptop. Researchers draw a clear line between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is internal. It releases the injured person from the ongoing cost of sustained anger, and it does not require the offender to deserve it. Reconciliation is something else entirely, requiring demonstrated change and rebuilt trust over time. Darius chose to understand that Aaliyah had been manipulated. That understanding let him release the weight of resentment, without reopening any door. Within the week, the legal consequences spread like a current through still water. The development partners had already contacted their attorneys. Gerald had filed a formal complaint. The power of attorney documents were under review. And then, one by one, the subcontractors sent their notices. Marcus's crew, the electrical team from East Point, the HVAC contractors out of College Park, the concrete company from Norcross that had poured every Reed development foundation for 11 consecutive years. Each sent clean, professional written notices declining to continue service under the current company leadership. No drama, no ultimatums, just letters and then silence. The Buckhead condominium project stalled within days. The Virginia Highland contract entered a dispute hold. The developer who had recently signed with Aliyah and Khalil started asking operational questions that no one remaining at Reed Development could answer. The company had not been attacked. It had simply been vacated by everyone whose presence had ever made it real. Then came the phone call Aliyah was not ready for. She discovered she was pregnant. In the worst possible convergence of her life. The company fracturing, her accounts frozen, her professional reputation in Atlanta's development community quietly and permanently altered. She called Khalil Brooks. He answered. She told him. He said flatly, "That is not my problem." Then he ended the call. She called back. No answer. Again. Voicemail. She texted. Silence. A mutual contact told her carefully that Khalil had left Atlanta, that he had been seen in Dallas, that he was not coming back. He had taken the money, left the woman, and moved on to the next arrangement. The way he had always done, the way he would always do. Aliyah had not been a love story to him. She had been a transaction, and the transaction was complete. She drove to Darius's new Buckhead construction site on a Thursday morning. It was raining, not a storm, just that soft, steady Atlanta rain that makes the whole city look like it has been washed gray and quiet. She parked across the street and watched through the windshield. Darius was near the site entrance in a hard hat, talking with Marcus, one hand on a set of blueprints. He looked settled. Not joyful, not performatively at peace, just settled, like a man who knows exactly where his feet are. She got out of the car. She crossed the street. When he saw her, his face did not change. He handed the blueprints to Marcus and stepped toward her. She told him everything. Khalil gone, the bank account, the pregnancy. She was crying before she finished. Not the measured tears she had sometimes used in arguments. These were the real kind, the kind that come from somewhere too deep to manage. When she finished, Darius was quiet. Then he reached into the chest pocket of his work jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was from early in their marriage, a backyard cookout around year 2. Aliyah was laughing at something he had said. Darius had his arm around her shoulder. Both of them looked open, easy, full of something that used to exist between them. The photo was slightly worn at the corners. She took it with both hands, looked at it. And then she noticed something. In the picture, she was wearing her original wedding ring, the thin gold band with the small inset diamond that Darius had saved 3 years to buy. The ring on her finger now was different. A larger setting, she had replaced it with 2 years into their marriage. She had told him she wanted an upgrade. He had said whatever made her happy. She had not thought about the original ring in years. She held the photo for a long time without speaking. "Darius," she started. He gently took it back and slid it into his pocket. "You asked for a divorce because you wanted something better," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "Now you have your answer." A pause. "I'm not angry. I'm just not here anymore." He turned and walked back toward the site. Zuri was standing near the site trailer at the edge of the property, coat buttoned against the rain. Present, calm, and entirely without triumph. She was simply there, in his corner. Darius and Zuri walked toward the site entrance together. My wife stood in the rain. In one hand, she still held her car keys. In the other, nothing. She looked down at her left hand, the ring on her finger catching a gray bead of rainwater, and she did not move for a long time. Sometimes the most complete thing a person can do to someone who has hurt them deeply is simply continue. Continue building. Continue healing. Continue becoming the person they were always meant to be. That is exactly what Darius Reed did next. Darius Reed did not spend a single night plotting revenge. That might surprise you. After everything, the betrayal, the stolen funds, the fabricated company history, the deliberate legal architecture designed to strip everything he had built, a reasonable person might expect a man to simmer in it, to rehearse in the dark the things he should have said and done and caught sooner. He didn't. Not because he wasn't hurt, he was, but he had learned something early. Watching a foreman lose his composure over a bad concrete pour on a sweltering summer morning in his first year in construction. He had learned that anger burns fuel you need for the work ahead. You can spend your energy being furious at the ground for shifting. Or you can shore up the foundation and build something stronger in its place. Darius chose to build. Legacy Reed Construction signed its first major contract in December, a segment of the Piedmont Park Conservancy redevelopment project in Midtown Atlanta, covering green space renovation and pedestrian infrastructure improvements along Monroe Drive. It was not the largest contract Darius had ever managed, but it was the one that felt most entirely his. Community-facing, permanent, the kind of work that changes how a neighborhood moves through itself for the next generation. Marcus ran the crew. The subcontractors who had walked away from Reed Development showed up on the first morning at the Monroe Drive site, tools in hand, without being summoned twice. An electrical contractor named Junior, who had worked alongside Darius for 11 years, arrived with a handshake and 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't work for nobody else," Junior said simply. Darius nodded and handed 1 cup back. That had always been their language. It still translated. Researchers have documented post-traumatic growth, the measurable improvement in clarity, purpose, and relational depth that can emerge directly from navigating serious adversity. The key is not the absence of pain, but meaning-making. The ability to integrate what happened into a narrative that frames you not as a permanent victim, but as someone who endured, redirected, and rebuilt. Darius did not emerge harder. He emerged clearer, knowing precisely what he valued, because losing the wrong things had illuminated everything worth keeping. Meanwhile, what remained of Reed Development came apart gradually and without drama. Aaliyah retained 2 attorneys to untangle the financial damage Khalil had left behind. Legal costs began consuming personal assets she had assumed were insulated. She was eventually forced to sell the condominium on Pace's Ferry Road, the one with the wide back porch overlooking a stand of old oak trees that she used to say felt like peace. The Buckhead condominium project was acquired by a competing developer at a significant loss. The original investor group did not look back. The Georgia investigation moved slower than the money did. By the time a civil freeze order was filed, the $420,000 had already moved through 2 accounts and into a third registered under a different name in Delaware, the same state Khalil had named in his recorded conversation. A detective from the Fulton County Financial Crimes Unit told Darius's attorney plainly, "We know where it went. Getting it back is a different matter." The case remained open. Khalil remained in Dallas. The law, Darius had come to understand, is not always faster than a man with a planned exit. And slowly, in the silence Khalil left behind, the silence of a life she had dismantled for someone who had never seen her at all, Aaliyah arrived at an understanding that no legal proceeding could have delivered. Khalil had never looked at her. He had looked at the company, the contracts, the client network, and the leverage that came with being close to the right woman at the right moment. She had been a door he needed open. Once he was through it, the door itself meant nothing. She had traded a man who carried dinner home in a brown paper bag on a Tuesday because he noticed she was tired, for a man who had never once, across 11 months of careful attention, actually seen her. That understanding did not arrive all at once. It came in installments, the way hard truths always do. A little at a time, until one morning it was simply there, fully formed and immovable. Darius and Zuri did not rush. That was important to both of them, and they said so early, in the careful, honest way that people who have carried real pain tend to talk. With pauses, with room for the other person to say the true thing. Zuri had been hurt in a previous marriage, and she had been hurt in ways that made her wary of speed. She valued peace the way some people value money, with a precise awareness of what it cost, how quickly it could disappear, and how much daily attention it required to maintain. Darius understood that without having to be told. In fact, it was one of the things about her that felt most right. They ate dinner together on weeknights. They attended a Sunday morning service at a church in Decatur. In February, they drove out to Stone Mountain and walked the trail in the cold, talking about construction and loss and the particular Atlanta sunsets that looked like someone tilted a jar of orange paint against the western sky. On the drive home, Darius reached across the center console and took her hand. She did not pull away. In the spring, they planted a crepe myrtle in the backyard of their Decatur home. Zuri's idea. Darius dug the hole himself. They did not make a ceremony of it. They just set the tree in the ground, brushed the soil from their hands, and went inside to make dinner. That is what building sometimes looks like. Not a ceremony, just a quiet choice, made at the same moment by 2 people who have both been through enough to understand what they are choosing. He no longer needed to know what she would do next. For the first time in years, the only question that mattered to Darius Reed was what he himself would do. And he already had his answer. There is a particular kind of evening that only happens in Atlanta in late spring. The heat has not yet turned brutal, so the air is warm without being heavy. The light comes through the kitchen windows at a long, low angle that makes everything inside look a little golden. The kind of light that asks nothing of you except to notice it. On one of those evenings, Darius Reed was at the kitchen table in his Decatur home, reviewing blueprints for a new Legacy Reed project, a community recreation center in East Atlanta Village that the city had commissioned for fall construction. The blueprints were spread wide across the table. A yellow highlighter, a red pen, and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago sat at his elbow. Outside, a neighbor's wind chime kept a slow, easy rhythm in a breeze that came and went, like it had nowhere particular to be. Zuri was at the counter making dinner. Chicken, rice, something with tomatoes and herbs that smelled like a kitchen somewhere warm and good. She had a small radio on near the stove playing old soul, the kind with brass and unhurried rhythm, and she was singing under her breath, just barely audible. Just enough. Darius looked up from the blueprints and watched her for a long moment. He said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said. This was peace, not the absence of difficulty. Difficulty would come again, it always did. But the presence of something steady, something that did not require him to diminish himself in order to maintain it. Something that would not quietly reposition itself into a threat the moment it calculated an advantage. He went back to his blueprints. Attachment researchers distinguish between anxious attachment, the persistent fear that love may collapse without warning, driving constant performance and self-monitoring, and secure attachment, the quiet ability to simply exist with someone without bracing for judgment or abandonment. What Darius was living in that kitchen was perhaps for the first time in years, the second kind. Not the adrenaline of being chosen, just the steady comfort of being with someone who is not building a case against him. He had stopped turning his thoughts toward Aliyah, not in a cold or deliberate way, not the kind of silence that comes from building walls. In the way that follows genuine acceptance, the way a chapter closes when you have finally read it completely, and you simply do not need to return to the beginning anymore. He hoped she found her footing. He genuinely did. She was about to become a mother, and her child would need her to be steady. He had watched her work when she decided to commit. She had real capability, real drive. She had simply spent a season of her life offering those things to someone who treated them as instruments rather than gifts. That happened to good people. It did not mean there was no road back for her, but that road was hers to build. His was right here, in the blueprints on the table, in Marcus's steady voice on the phone every morning, in the crepe myrtle in the backyard already showing its first pink buds, in the warm kitchen light and the sound of someone singing softly at the counter. His road was in this quiet. Later that evening, after dinner, Darius and Zuri stood on the back porch for a while. The Atlanta skyline was visible in the distance, that particular scatter of lights that every person who has ever built a life in this city carries somewhere in the chest, like a second heartbeat. He had his arm around her shoulders. Her head was tilted slightly toward him. She said after a comfortable silence, "How's the East Atlanta project looking?" He said, "Like something worth building." She smiled. He felt it more than he saw it. They went inside. They washed the dishes together. They turned off the kitchen light. The blueprints stayed on the table for morning. Psychologists who specialize in relational trauma recovery consistently find that sustainable healing is built through the repetition of ordinary safe moments. Showing up for work, eating dinner with someone trustworthy, standing on a porch at dusk. Those small, accumulated moments are what gradually rewrites the nervous system's expectation of danger. It is not the dramatic scene that heals you. It is the Tuesday evening that asks nothing of you but your presence. This story reminds us of something that no greeting card will ever say out loud. When the person who was supposed to stay doesn't, the silence they leave behind is a specific kind of weight. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the extra coffee cup you still reach for out of habit. The side of the bed that stays made. The Tuesday evenings that used to mean something and now just mean Tuesday. If that is where you are right now, here is what Darius Reed's story quietly asks of you. This week, find one thing you built with your own hands. A garden bed, a quilt folded on the cedar chest, a recipe written in your own handwriting on a stained index card, and tend to it. Not to heal, not to move on, just to remind your hands that they still know how to make something real. Next Sunday morning, call the one person who has known you the longest, not to talk about what happened, but to ask them what they had for breakfast. Let the conversation be small. Let it be ordinary. Ordinary is not nothing. For a lot of us at this point in life, ordinary is everything. And on the evening that feels the hardest, when the house is too quiet and the chair across the table sits empty, do not reach for the television. Instead, write down one true thing you are still proud of, not what you survived, what you built, what you gave, what you were when you were at your best. That piece of paper is your foundation. Start there.